Hey guys, hope you're having a good day. So today we're going to get into this Yard Machines by MTD 4-horse 22-inch high wheel push mower. Backstory on this one was one of my neighbors moved into a house. The previous owner left this behind. It was pushed in the back of the shed. So they don't know anything about it and I don't know anything about it. So we're going to kind of see what it needs to get going again, if anything. But first look, we've got kind of a handlebar issue. It's kind of cocked that way. And then if you take a look at the control cable, it's disconnected, and it also seems like there's an internal brake somewhere. So first off, it probably needs a cable, but we're going to flip this thing up, take a look at the blade, make sure the crank's not bent, and then move on from there. Okay, flipping this thing up. Wow, this thing's got the mulch plug still on it. Wonder how rare that thing is. But checking the blade quick, what I typically do is just stick my thumb right against the blade on one side, rotate it around, and make sure that the blade touches your thumb again in the same spot on the other side. So I think we're not bent at all. And you can also kind of watch the end of the bolt head here, make sure it's not wobbling. But I think we're good. So we'll move to check fuel and oil next. Okay, checking oil here. Remember, this thing was on its side, so we're probably going to have to wipe this dipstick off to get the right level. Wow, that is black. That'll definitely need to be changed. But I think we got to screw these the whole way in to get the right reading. Yeah, we're right at the bottom of the full. So that should be good enough to test run this. There is oil in there. Okay, let's check some fuel here. See what we got. That's dry and either a lot of dirt or rust. That's the bottom of the tank there. I'll try to get a picture to flash up on the screen for you. Okay, so that's going to have to come off to get cleaned out. I guess we'll check air filter next, and maybe we can circumvent the control brake over here to try to test fire this thing, put some fuel directly through the carb. I kind of want to see that the coil's good before moving any further. We might just be limited to maybe a fuel issue and then that control cable, but we'll get this off and move on to that next. Okay, a little closer view, pop this off. And the 4-horse, I think that's technically a Quattro engine, or a Q or an SQ. It's just not, oh wow. That's probably from me tipping it up. Oil kind of gets into the carb there. All right. Yeah, that's from me tipping it up. And that is falling apart. So we're going to need a new filter for sure. Okay, let's pull that spring off back here and see if we can't get this thing to start. Okay, I got you pulled around to the back to kind of show you how I'm going to circumvent this. There's a spring that's holding the brake against the flywheel, and it's also killing spark. So in order to hear this run without the use of the control cable, since it's broken, we'll have to circumvent that. And to do that, I'm going to have to pull this cover off to show you guys, but I'm not condoning that you guys do this. If you have to do it on a piece of machinery, make sure you have a way to kill spark. Either pull the boot off to kill it, or make sure there's no fuel in it, so it'll just naturally run out of fuel. But yeah, we'll get this cover off. 1/4-inch screws. Okay, cover off, and this is our brake assembly. So there's an arm in here with a brake pad that goes against the flywheel to stop the engine when you let go of the bail bar up there. And then here's your ignition kill wire that corresponds with that. There's kind of an arm that'll touch ground and kill spark to the coil and stop your engine as well. So to circumvent this, I'm just going to pull the spring off. pull the brake arm with a zip tie, like that. And that mimics our run condition. So we're not grounding out the coil anymore and the brake's off the flywheel. So we should be able to put some fuel in here now and see if it'll pop off. All right, well, we're set up to kind of test fire this thing. I'm gonna put this cover lightly on top of here so it's not bouncing around as I'm pulling on it. There is oil in the carb here from me tipping it up, but this is some 2-cycle mix. It should work fine for this test and should actually help because we don't know how long this is sitting, and the oil in it should kind of help lubricate everything. Try some carb spray. Maybe there's a little too much oil. All right, well, it'll run. We got a good coil. Yeah, I don't know if you guys can see, but look at all that oil that came out of the exhaust. Jeez. So hopefully that's just for me tipping it up and we don't have bad rings or something. But let's keep going. We'll get that tank and carb off. Okay, quick anatomy lesson here before we go to take this thing off. You got to pay attention to these springs here. You got one here for your throttle that adjusts your throttle with this lever arm here if your engine has that option, and then your governor spring back here, they both attach to this loop in this linkage. So you want to pay attention to that and make sure they go back on if they come dislodged as we take this off. But we've got a 1/2-inch headed bolt here and a 3/8 headed bolt here. Those are the only two things you got to remove to pull this thing off. And you also have to keep in mind you got a rubber elbow here that'll come off as well. Slide it right off of there. Unhook your linkage and you're free. So one thing to keep in mind too is you saw this O-ring and this retainer stayed on the unit. Those actually go back in here when you go to put this back together. So make sure you don't lose these. And yeah, let's reposition you and we'll start going through this. Okay, cleaned off a little bit. I think what I want to try to do first is clean this tank out. And I'm not sure if you guys could see it before, but that's what we look like. So I think first things first. Oh, okay. I didn't see that. We got a hole in the tank. 2 of them. Wow, okay. Well, that changes things. Okay, it took a quick second to kind of figure out how I want to tackle this, and I don't think I'm going to try to patch this. But it looks like what they tried was maybe some hot glue, and it looks like pieces of a tarp. Kind of creative, but obviously didn't work out for them. And this is probably why they left it behind and pushed it in the back of the shed, because that leaking tank, they didn't want to mess with it. But I think I'm going to do some looking online. Maybe I can get this whole assembly for fairly cheap aftermarket. And I say that because this gasket diaphragm is likely petrified and needs to be replaced too. So it might be cheaper just to get carb tank with the gasket diaphragm. Worst case scenario, I do have a dead 3.5 Classic that has the tank mounted carb as well. I don't know how interchangeable they are, but I'm going to have to look some stuff up. And I'll bring you back when I have a good path forward. All right, so I did some research online and I got some stuff pulled in to talk about here before we move forward. This is the tank that came off of our project mower, and I cleaned it up a little bit, and I'll get into as to why in a couple seconds here. But I also pulled off the tank from that 3.5 Classic. That's a parts engine. It actually has a bad crankshaft, so I'm just pulling parts off of that one. But looking up online, here's some part numbers for you. This is the code off the front of the engine for the mower we're working on, and if you're unaware where to look to get that, it's usually stamped in the metal on the front of the blower shroud. So I pulled that off of that engine, and then I pulled the code off of the parts engine that I'm pulling the tank off of here. And the good news is that the tank part number is the same, so we can just swap tanks if we need to. The bad news is the carb numbers are different. So there was some kind of a date code changeover where the one that we need is 795477, and the one from the 3.5 is 498809. And it would have been this number for ours if ours was made prior to 96. So our date code's actually 2000. So we were working on a 2000 year build mower. But the gasket diaphragm's actually the same too, so that's good. And I do have one from Sten's that I can use if we get into here and this is bad. But what I'm gonna do is pull the carb off this, pull the carb off this, swap the tank over to this one, inspect that gasket diaphragm, see if we need to clean anything out underneath there, and basically have a new tank on this carb. So the bad part about the tank is if you wanted an OEM one, it's like 50 bucks. And I was looking at aftermarket on Amazon. You can get a whole assembly like this for $30. So it was kind of tempting for me just to get that, but I figured for the sake of the video, we can actually go through this thing and see if the original carb will work just with a new tank that doesn't have a hole in it. So let's move on to pull this carb off of this tank. We'll take a look at that gasket diaphragm, see if we need to clean the carb. And if you haven't done that before, it's just 5 Phillips head screws, and then this thing will pull out of the tank. There's actually a pickup tube in here that goes to the bottom of the tank, and then there's kind of a integrated carb bowl underneath here that's where the fuel comes up into the carb from. So it'll pump from the tank here into that bowl, and then from the bowl into the engine. Okay, so screws are loose, and this should just kind of pop off. Here we go. And I want to, looks like some fuel leaking out of here. And the gasket kind of will stick on one side or the other around it, so I usually just run this little pick around there to separate it. In the case that it's still good and we can reuse it, I don't want to tear it taking this off. Let's try that. Okay. Let's get these screws out of here so I don't lose them. Okay, so this actually doesn't look that bad. What I'm looking for is a lot of deformation, mainly in these flaps here, because that's what pumps the fuel up from the tank. And then there's a spring in here too, so just be aware of that. Don't lose that. But this probably deserves a spray out quick. It actually seems pretty clean. And then here's what I was talking about. There's kind of the carb bowl here where this piece drops into. So it'll pull fuel from the tank through this hole, which is the pickup tube hole, into this area and then into the engine. So this is pretty much garbage at this point. So I'm going to get this one off of here and we'll take a look at that, see if the tank needs to be cleaned out, and maybe just swap everything over. Yeah, so this is the gasket diaphragm out of this one, And this is what I was looking for on that other carb. You see how this flap is kind of deformed there? So that would be a sign that we would just need to replace this. You can kind of see a dimple on this one too. So that needs to be cleaned out as well. I'm gonna probably have to scrape that out. Looks like some maybe water got in there. But the rest of the tank looks okay. Maybe you need to just clean that out with some bad gas. We should be good there. But I'm gonna take some time. I'm gonna spray these outside, get this carb cleaned up and ready to be put back on here. And yeah, I think we should be good to like throw some gas in here and see if it'll stay running. It's probably gonna smoke like a freight train with all that oil that was in there, but hey. All right, let me do that and I'll bring you back. Breaking in here halfway to show you the tank. Cleaned up pretty nice. It's not perfect, but it's a lot better than it was. So that should be good. I did put a rag in there and try to swish around to get a lot of the kind of caked on stuff on the bottom, but I think we'll be okay. And I figured with the pickup screen looking like that, we'll probably just want to do a full tear down on this. So I'll show you how to do that and remove the emulsion tube on these. So I usually take the spring off. Well, maybe we'll leave that on. Nope, I'll take it off. It was kind of just stuck on there. Take the screen out. We're going to want to spray out the screen. And to get the emulsion tube out, I've covered this before in another one. Grab some needle nose pliers on the throttle plate. And we're just going to pull it out. Like that. Remember how that went in. So you have the two kind of indents there and the one on the other side. It always goes in that way. Then we're going to take the throttle shaft out. And then in there you can see the tip of the emulsion tube. You can see how dirty it is too. We're going to take a screwdriver, press on the tip of that to shoot the emulsion tube out that way. So let's get this retaining ring and O-ring out first so we don't damage that, because this needs a fair amount of force. That's it. The last one I did flung across the room, so yeah, it's probably good that we were doing this. They look pretty clogged up. So, let me go outside, I'll spray all this out, and I'll bring you back when we're ready to put everything back together. Okay, so I think we're all cleaned up, ready to be put back together. We got the tank cleaned, the carb cleaned. Let me show you guys where I sprayed through in case you guys are doing one of these. I make sure these ports are clear and this port's clear. That's kind of the route that the fuel takes through that gasket and diaphragm from the pickup tube. So it'll come through here, kind of go in this area, and then get pumped over here to the bowl where it gets put up into the carb. And then for the carb, I usually spray out through this opening here. That'll shoot a stream back through the screen and kind of dislodge anything that might have been sucked up that way. Through the emulsion tube area. And then there's a brass jet here that you probably want to hit as well. And then just generally cleaning it out. So, first things first, this is actually the venturi area of the carb that fell out while I was cleaning, so don't be alarmed. It's loose in there typically, and it's held in by the actual emulsion tube. So to put it back in, there's a V-notch here, and there's a V-notch down in the carb. So you just have to line those up, which will typically be pretty simple to do. Just drop that in there, and that's lined up. And then our clean emulsion tube. Drop that in that. Make sure your venturi's lined up. Kind of push it in. And I usually just lean on it on the edge of the table here. There. So that is in. Then we can put our screen back on that we cleaned out. Throttle, shaft, then the butterfly valve, or butterfly plate. Okay. Make sure that's working. Yeah, we're good there. Okay. O-ring goes in this side with that retainer. Remember, it was stuck on the engine out there, so we took it off, and that's supposed to be reinstalled here before we put it on, because that's the seal around that intake tube. Then the spring. Okay. So that's good to go. Bring the tank over here. Now this is that used gasket diaphragm. I'm going to try to reuse it despite me having one. I just want to see if it's going to work. But when you put these on, the machine surface here, you always put the diaphragm on that and then the gasket on top of that. So for this here, I can tell the gasket's already facing up. So we would just drop that on there. And then with our spring, drop that down and onto the tank. So, only thing left is the screws, which I tightened down kind of in a star pattern for an even crush on that gasket. So I'm going to get that done, and we'll keep going. Okay, I think we're good. Trying not to over tighten that, because this carb is plastic. If you didn't notice that the black was going away, that's because that's just painted black. It's actually a plastic carb. So another thing I want to check is the primer. You can actually do this off of the tank, and we should be able to hear it move, but I'm going to put some gas in here and we can actually see it. We should be able to see it squirt out the what would go into the intake. But we'll listen here. Let me get some gas in here, and we'll try that out before putting it back on the mower. Okay, back outside, we got some clean gas in there. And I think I got you in a position where she'll be able to see if it's priming. You should see kind of a squirt of gas go that way. There it goes. Yeah. All right, back on the mower. I almost forgot this elbow inside. All right, now we're ready. So I think I got what I need here, all the hardware. So remember, this linkage needs to be put back on this arm. That. And then slide it back onto the intake tube. Put our bolts back in. And there's a spacer in kind of the tin of the engine here. You don't want to lose. Mine stayed in there. Okay. Make sure these springs are in the right spot. Working correctly. Let me move you back and we'll test fire it. Let me put this cover back on first. Okay, I think we're ready to rock. And remember, we're still kind of jerry-rigged on the back there, so I'm not going to let this run for too long. And I'm just going to choke it with my hand to kill it. So let's see how this works out. We're going to prime it, try to start it, see if it runs. right, that thing was a smoke show for a couple minutes. I think it just smoked out my entire neighborhood, but it did clear up. We got a good runner, and now we just have to wait on that control cable to keep going because I don't want to keep starting it like this. But yeah, fuel issue solved, and we can keep going on some other stuff. Okay, so it's a new day. I was able to track down a new foam air filter that goes with this housing. I'll get to that in a second. And a new control cable. So here's some part numbers for you guys. The air filter that goes with this housing is 272235S. And there was another date code break here where it would have taken 698369. And that's the newer version that was on that 3.5 Classic. So I was looking at this versus that housing, and there's no reason why we can't just use this housing. So I looked that up. There's actually an upgrade kit that you can get. It's $50.99, and you get both plastic pieces and then the newer style filter that doesn't have this lip on it. But I figured, why not just reuse the original metal housing? And we'll take this filter out of here, get the housing cleaned up. Now this one's actually got the cup inside of it. Yeah. So we'll get this housing cleaned up. There's a lot of oil in it, and in this filter too. And I'll show you how to oil this filter, and then we'll put that back together, get it on the engine, and that'll pretty much button up the air and fuel part of this. Okay, so we got all our parts cleaned up, ready for the new filter. And if I didn't mention it, this is actually a rotary number. It's 12939. Put it up on the screen or in the description for you guys, but if you didn't know, these foam types need to be oiled to work correctly. So as your engine's sucking in air, the oil in this is actually attracting the dirt, not so much the foam. So I usually just squirt some oil in there, squeeze it into the material, and then I'll take a paper towel and squeeze out the excess. You don't want it super sopping, but you do want oil in there to collect that dirt. Squeeze it into a paper towel. Okay. That cup in. Cinch that top down on there. There we go. All right, and that's all she wrote for the air filter. We're good there. Let's do that control cable. So I was prepping to do the control cable. I figured we might as well take care of this handle first. So if we notice here, it looks like these are our height adjustments. There's 1, 2, 3 holes. We're on the top hole over here. If you look at the other side, we're on the middle hole over here. So that's kind of why our handlebar was cocked to the one side from the very beginning. So I think I'm going to utilize this middle hole. I'll take that out and shimmy that handlebar up, get it on the same height, and then we'll move on to the cable. Jeez. Okay. All right. Okay. Now, this one never had a piece of hardware on it, and I was able to find a couple nuts in my hardware lottery bin. Just a bunch of leftover hardware that I have saved that fit on these studs. So that's what we're going to use here, just so that they're uniform on both sides. I gotta go get the socket for that. That solves that. Okay, so if you remember, we circumvented this, so we'll have to take this cover back off to reattach that spring. Okay. The spring end goes right on this hook here, like that. Okay. Okay, so while we're still here, we'll do this side of the cable. This is the part number for that, if I didn't give it to you. 9460957. And I got that from looking up the model number on the chassis of the mower here. So this will slip in to that hole. You clip it in. So that's it for that side. And I'll move you and we'll do the handlebar part. All right, top side. All we got to do is pry this out of the handlebar. Here's the new one. I want to route this probably like that. No. All right, we'll just put it on top there. And all you got to do is squeeze it in and connect it to the handlebar up here. All right. Okay, got the cover back on, and we'll test fire it with the new control cable. Okay, works good. What's next? Oil and blade. Throw a zip tie on here before I forget. All right. Okay, so it's time for oil and blade. I'm gonna run this for a little bit, get the oil warmed up. We're gonna tip it, we're gonna leave it tipped over, and we're gonna pull the blade off at the same time that the oil's draining. So I got the bail bar clamped, and we'll just let it run. Pretty dull. All right, we're sharp. And one thing I wanted to note too is this is called a mulching blade. And a lot of people say, oh, you only need to sharpen this edge of it, but I always sharpen it the whole way up, because my opinion is this is going to do the first cut, but then this is going to mulch whatever's in your deck already circulating around. So I always sharpen the entire thing. Okay, let's see what we got. Really black. I don't see any metallics in it though, so that's good. And it looks like 12 ounces. If it'll settle out. Yeah, 12. I think these are supposed to take 20. So yeah, let's get some new oil in there. Okay, this takes SAE 30 or 1030. I think you can use 530 synthetic too. This is just a refilled container. I usually mark off the 20 ounces for these. But this is 1030 high mileage, I think. Yeah, pretty much right at the full. We're on a slope too, so it's a little off level. Okay, last thing I want to do is kind of clean this thing up a little bit. I'm not going to go crazy with rinsing it off because all my hoses are dedicated to growing grass right now, but this is just some simple green, and we'll just rub it down, clean it up a little bit. Scrape this dirt out quick before getting my rag all messy. I don't know if you guys noticed this, but the back two wheels are at the highest setting. This one's at the second to highest, and this one's at the first to highest. So let's correct that quick.
I was wrong. Those were actually almost all the way down, so we kind of had a hot rod situation going on.
All right, well, I think we're pretty much at the end of the road for this one. We've corrected all the issues that we found, and I think the last thing is just to do a couple passes with it and see how it does. Cuts pretty good. Okay, quick sanity check on a level surface this time after running it. And we are right at the full. So I'm gonna call that good. And that turned black pretty quick, but at least we got fresh stuff in there. All right, well with that, I think we'll end this one here and start cleaning up with some help from my parts stash, mainly the tank. I'm really only in this, the air filter, that control cable, and then the oil. So probably 20 bucks total. But if you had to buy that tank, I'd probably say that carb tank combo unit that's already assembled, ready to go, is a pretty good solution. I'll put a link in the description if you guys are interested in that. You just want to take what you have off and put that on. Pretty quick solution. And one note too is that kit kind of came with the air filter already, so kind of a good deal. But yeah, hopefully what we covered helped somebody out, or you guys found this entertaining. Thanks for joining me on this one, and I'll catch you on the next one.